It was the morning of November 9th, 2005, in Robinson, Texas, a quiet, close-knit town just south of Waco. But that calm was broken by one urgent phone call. On the other end of the line, a woman's panicked voice told 911 that something terrible had happened inside her home. She couldn't explain much at that moment, but the fear in her tone said it all. Something was horribly wrong. That single call would mark the beginning of a tragic story, one that would leave a family shattered, a community in shock, and the public stunned by what was revealed. This is the story of Darlene and Keith Gentry, a relationship built on love and promise, but one that ended in heartbreak and tragedy. Darlene Dascosile was born on November 2, 1974, the middle of three daughters in a close and supportive family. From an early age, it was clear she was special. Friends and relatives remembered her as bright, disciplined, and full of energy. She wasn't just beautiful on the outside, she was warm, caring, and ambitious. Growing up in Central Texas, Darlene became well known in her community. With her blonde hair, glowing smile, and natural charm, people were drawn to her. She never officially won a beauty pageant, but at school she was admired as if she had. Classmates even nicknamed her Texas Beauty Queen. She was elected prom queen, joined the flag corps, and was always at the heart of school events. People loved being around her because she was genuine. She made others feel noticed and valued. After graduating from Yo High School in Cameron in 1993, Darlene enrolled at Texas State Technical College in Waco. She started out training as a dental assistant, though her bigger dream was to become a nurse. It was during these college years that she met someone who would change the course of her life, Keith Gentry. Keith was born on September 2, 1974, in Waco to parents Women and Glenda Gentry. He grew up in Robinson, surrounded by family and friends. Keith had two sisters and was known for his calm, dependable personality. At Robinson High School, people saw him as someone steady and good-hearted. He didn't seek attention, but he was respected because he could be counted on. Like Darlene, Keith also attended Texas State Technical College, where he studied drafting and welding. Later, he secured a stable position as an engineering assistant at a utility company, a solid job that gave him a steady future. Keith had the mindset of a provider, hard-working, focused, and already thinking about building a family life. When Darlene and Keith met, the connection was instant. They fell in love quickly, and both families welcomed the relationship with open arms. Everyone believed a wedding was only a matter of time, but as often happens with young couples, timing got in the way. By 1997, both had graduated and were ready for the next chapter. Darlene hoped for a proposal, but Keith wasn't ready for marriage just yet. After some difficult but honest talks, they decided to go their separate ways. The breakup was painful for both, and their families were caught off guard. Hoping for a fresh start, Darlene moved to Dallas and returned to dental work. But city life wasn't a good fit. A stressful lifestyle, the loneliness of living away from home, and even an incident where her car was stolen, made things worse. After about a year, she returned to her hometown. Soon after, she and Keith reconnected. This time, they knew what they wanted. In 1999, Keith proposed, and soon after, they were married. It finally felt like everything had fallen into place. The newlyweds bought their first home and began creating the future they had once only dreamed of. But Darlene still felt something was missing. Dental work no longer felt like her true calling. With determination, she returned to school, this time to study nursing. Keith was proud of her and supported her every step of the way. Friends and family saw them as a happy couple, sharing responsibilities, laughing often, and walking side by side as true partners. By the early 2000s, Keith and Darlene Gentry had built what many would consider an ideal life in Robinson, Texas. Their home sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood, just a short drive from Waco, and right next door to Keith's parents. That closeness to family was often a blessing, though later it would add new layers of complexity to their lives. Keith held a steady position as an engineering assistant with the local electric utility company. Darlene, after completing her studies, had become a registered nurse. With 2 secure incomes, they lived comfortably. Their lifestyle wasn't lavish, but it was stable enough to support a family and enjoy small luxuries along the way. Family was always their priority. In 2001, their first son, Chase, was born. Cody followed in 2004, and in 2005, their youngest, Cade, arrived. With 3 boys under the age of 5, life was busy, but the Gentrys embraced parenthood with the support of both sets of grandparents nearby. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect family: attractive parents, happy children, and a well-kept home filled with love. But inside the home, the reality wasn't quite so simple. Keith's job often required long trips, leaving Darlene to handle both her nursing shifts and the demands of raising 3 small children. Even when Keith was home, he was usually exhausted from work and wanted rest, which meant the balance of responsibilities rarely shifted. Seeing the strain it caused, Keith eventually left his higher-paying travel-heavy job for a lower-salaried desk position that would keep him closer to home. It was a decision made out of love, but it came at a price. Their income dropped, their finances tightened, and Keith began to feel stuck in work that no longer challenged or fulfilled him. The frustration grew heavier over time. Meanwhile, Darlene's habits reportedly stayed the same. She took pride in maintaining a spotless home, hosting friends, and buying things that, with their new budget, were harder to afford. Arguments about money became frequent. Keith believed she spent too freely, and he grew increasingly resentful as childcare often fell on him and his parents. Family members and friends noticed a shift. The once cheerful couple now seemed tense. Quiet complaints replaced laughter, and an emotional distance began to grow between them. Still, neither showed signs of wanting a divorce. Keith, especially, appeared determined to hold the family together. Then came the morning of November 9, 2005. At 6:11 a.m., a shaken Darlene dialed 911. Her voice was panicked as she described a terrifying scene. The back door of their home was wide open. Keith was lying in bed, covered in blood, barely clinging to life. She said some of his guns were missing, and described the horrifying sound of him gurgling, with pink foam bubbling from his mouth. Darlene explained to the dispatcher that she hadn't been in bed with Keith that night. Their youngest son, only 18 months old, had been restless, so she had taken him into a separate bedroom where the other 2 boys were sleeping. She claimed she stayed there, put on a movie for them, and eventually dozed off. Around 6 a.m., she said she awoke, noticed the back door standing open, and discovered her husband gravely wounded. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Keith was still alive, but just barely. He had been shot in the head and was completely unresponsive. The pink foam from his mouth signaled severe trauma, and doctors knew his chances of recovery were slim. He was rushed to Hillcrest Baptist Medical Center in Waco and placed on life support. Despite every effort, he never regained consciousness. On November 11, 2005, Keith Gentry was pronounced dead. With his death, a homicide investigation began immediately. Detectives turned their focus to the only other adult inside the home that night. Darlene. Her account of what happened became the center of the investigation, and she was questioned almost right away. She told police that the night before, November 8, had started normally. She went out for dinner and drinks with friends, returning home around 8:30 p.m., but when she got back, Keith was angry. He had found a restaurant receipt and accused her of spending money they didn't have. The argument escalated, and according to Darlene, she left the house for a while to calm down by driving around. When Darlene returned home later that night, she said she apologized and tried to put the argument behind them. Keith went to bed in the master bedroom, while Darlene stayed in another room with their 3 boys. She explained that their youngest son had been restless, and she wanted to help him settle down. According to her account, she briefly woke around 5:15 a.m. when the dog barked. Thinking it was nothing unusual, since the dog sometimes barked at shadows, she went back to sleep. About 45 minutes later, at 6 a.m., she got up and walked through the house. When she tried to wake Keith for work, she found him lying in bed, bleeding and unresponsive. She also noticed that the back door was wide open, and that their locked gun cabinet appeared tampered with several weapons missing. Her story suggested a horrifying possibility: an intruder had broken into the house during the night, shot Keith, and stolen guns before vanishing without a trace. But as investigators looked more closely, cracks in Darlene's story quickly began to show. First was the question of timing. Darlene insisted she hadn't checked on Keith until 6 a.m., but forensic evidence suggested he had been shot much earlier. The trajectory of the bullet, the pooling of blood, and his medical condition all pointed to an earlier attack, one that would have been hard to miss. Then there was the so-called burglary. While Darlene claimed multiple guns were gone, investigators found several of them stacked neatly just outside the back door. That didn't fit the profile of a panicked thief. Instead, it looked like someone had carefully arranged the weapons to stage a scene. Access to the gun cabinet raised even more questions. Only 2 people knew how to open it: Keith and Darlene. For a random intruder to know the exact location of the cabinet and the key seemed highly unlikely. Her behavior also raised doubts. As a trained nurse, she had the knowledge and skills to attempt CPR, or at least check Keith's vital signs. But she didn't. When paramedics arrived, she hadn't tried to help him. Instead, she stayed in the room with her children, later explaining she feared for their safety. Even her 911 call struck detectives as odd. While emotional, her voice was calm, even rehearsed. She gave a detailed timeline of her evening and sleeping arrangements, almost as though she were laying out a defense, not reacting in shock. Later that same morning, detectives brought Darlene to the station for questioning. At first, she spoke willingly, but as soon as the questions turned more pointed, she stopped. Without warning, she invoked her right to remain silent and asked for a lawyer. The interview ended immediately. Still, Darlene insisted she had nothing to hide. She said she loved Keith, admitted they argued about money, but described their problems as ordinary, nothing unusual for a married couple. The police weren't convinced. The evidence suggested this was no break-in, it was something much closer to home. And then came the discovery that changed everything. During a second search of the Gentry house, investigators found something buried deep inside the kitchen trash: a pair of latex gloves. Inside the gloves was a .222 caliber shell casing, gunshot residue, and DNA from only 2 people, Keith and Darlene. A motive soon came into focus. Detectives learned that Keith carried a life insurance policy worth between $500,000 and $750,000. For a couple under financial strain, it was a powerful incentive. 19 days after the shooting, on November 28, 2005, Darlene Gentry was arrested and charged with murder. But her arrest didn't end the story. That very same day, Keith's parents, who still believed in her innocence, posted a $50,000 bond to secure her release. To them, Darlene wasn't just their daughter-in-law, she was the mother of their 3 grandsons, and they stood firmly behind her. But soon, troubling new information emerged. After her release, Darlene contacted a local landowner, Robert Pavella, about purchasing a rural property near Axtell, Texas. The property included a quiet pond, which she said reminded her of Keith's dream to take their boys fishing. It seemed like a touching gesture, but weeks later, she called Pavella again, this time asking if he could have the pond filled in. The sudden request alarmed him. Why would she want the pond gone so soon after expressing excitement about it? Suspicious, Pavella alerted authorities. Investigators immediately searched the pond. At the bottom, they recovered a .222 caliber revolver, the same type as the shell casing found in the gloves. It was the murder weapon. But police still wanted something more direct. They asked Pavella to help them set a trap. Agreeing to cooperate, he called Darlene and told her he needed to drain the pond before filling it. If she was worried about evidence, detectives hoped she'd act. She did. The very next day, under hidden surveillance, Darlene arrived at the property. Wearing boots and carrying a rod, she waded into the pond and poked at the exact spot where the gun had already been recovered. The entire scene was caught on camera. For investigators, it was the final piece they needed. In February 2007, Darlene Gentry, then 32 years old, went on trial in McLennan County, Texas. The case lasted 5 days. She faced 1 count of first-degree murder for shooting her husband while he slept. The most damaging evidence was the surveillance video. Darlene in the pond, searching for the weapon, combined with the staged burglary, the gloves in the trash, and her inconsistent timeline, the picture was now clear. Her defense team presented no witnesses during the guilt-innocence phase of the trial, relying only on cross-examination and legal arguments. But it wasn't enough. On February 8, 2007, the jury returned a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Darlene Gentry was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Prosecutors argued her motive was both financial and personal. She wanted freedom from her marriage and the security of Keith's life insurance. In their closing statements, they warned the jury not to be fooled by appearances. Today, Darlene is serving her sentence at the Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas. In 2017, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied her request for a new trial. She will first be eligible for parole in 2037. If denied, she could remain behind bars until 2067. Darlene has always claimed she is innocent, but the impact of that November morning has reached far beyond her prison walls. In 2010, a judge granted full custody of the 3 boys to Keith's parents and issued a permanent restraining order against Darlene. According to court documents, she hasn't spoken to her son since. Keith Gentry is remembered as a man of quiet strength, a devoted husband, a loving father, and a hard-working provider. He gave up career advancement to spend more time with his family. He lived with integrity, and he loved his children deeply. Though his life was cut short, his memory lives on in the hearts of his family, friends, and most of all, the sons who will always be his greatest legacy. Don't miss out on the next chilling case. Hit subscribe and join us here at True Crime Mystery for more true crime stories every week.